We don't claim to have written a madman's book, just a book which one no longer knows. And there is no reason to know who exactly is speaking, a doctor, a patient, an untreated patient, present, past, or future patient. That's why we use so many writers and poets. Who is to say if they are speaking as patients or doctors of civilization? Now, strangely, if we had tried to go beyond this traditional duality, it's precisely because we were writing together. Neither of us was the madman. Neither of us was the psychiatrist. There had to be two of us in order to find a process that was not reduced either to the psychiatrist or his madman, or to a madman and his psychiatrist. The process is what we call a flux. Now, once again, the flux is a notion we want it to remain ordinary and undefined. This could be a flux of words, ideas, shit, money. It could be a financial mechanism or a schizophrenic machine. It goes beyond all dualities. We dreamed of this book as a flux book.
The very roots of evil, of negativity and singularity, including the ultimate form of singularity, which is the whole state of things, the pure violence without object anymore. This is the typical violence of information. It's violent because what happens there is a murder of the real, the vanishing point of reality.
Let's not have a misunderstanding here.
Welcome to the Machinic Unconscious Happy Hour with Coop and Taylor Atkins. As always, we are sponsored by the People's Institute for Revolutionary Semiotics. Before we get started with our guest today, just want to throw out, we've got a Patreon account at patreon.com/MUHH. Consider throwing us $1 a month to help support the show. But we're very excited to have a special edition of Machinic Unconscious Happy Hour with Victor Vazquez, aka Kool AD.
What up?
Maybe to start us off, you could kind of maybe say a little bit about, because you've read some theory before. You said you read some Adorno, some Foucault, stuff like that. Maybe talk a little bit about kind of what your forays have looked like in the past, to some degree.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess I read it in college and a little bit after college, and then sprinkles here and there, just when it comes up, on Twitter or whatever. Sometimes someone will link something, or very rarely listen to a podcast, but
right.
Sometimes. I mean, I've never read Deleuze or Guattari before. Pretty interesting fools. I kind of need to read a lot more of them now to really understand what the hell's going on here. But I did like that intro that you read earlier. Pretty saucy. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like I feel like y'all need to guide the conversation.
Oh yeah, no worries there. I just kind of wanted to get kind of a feel of what you had been exposed to in the past, etc.
Yeah. Theory, I don't know. So I guess I prefer like Marx is pretty straightforward,
Mm-hmm. Right.
Sometimes dense too. I kind of prefer that type of stuff. Lacanian stuff gets a little, it gets a little boggy, but it is what it is. I'm open to trying to crack the little nut open, see what's going on.
My initial question would just be, has anything you've read, whether it be theory, whether it be poetry, fiction, does that aid in your creative outlet and your creative process? Oh yeah, definitely.
I mean, I was definitely, I was going off on a lot of mental tangents as I read in general. I'm a real slow reader. I mean, sometimes I'm quick when I'm really following something. I can read quick, but typically I'm gonna sit with something. That's why I kind of do like when I find the time for stuff like this. I do like it, but then I end up just gazing off into the distance for a good 15 minutes before reading the next line, or maybe pulling up 3-4 different Wikipedia articles between lines of stuff. So, but there is some interesting stuff going on here.
Right.
But I was doing a lot of jumping around just to kind of locate the context of these guys, 68 through 70s and Italy, France, and all that stuff. And I guess they're boys with Foucault to a degree, and they kind of have at least anti-fascist and somewhat Marxist leanings, but they kind of sort of don't like to be pigeonholed, it seems.
Right.
They're kind of anarchists, kind of communists, kind of this and that. Ultimately for human freedom, it seems. But, people can be tricky. So, so that's what I got from it so far. I'm hoping that y'all can point out some cute little Easter eggs for me to ponder.
Right. I think maybe to just contextualize kind of what their critique of desire is like, is to just kind of go through the generally kind of primarily Lacan's idea of what desire is and how it functions. But this is somewhat also obviously drawing from Freud. Is it's like when you're an infant, right? The infant is kind of helpless, so it has to emit, it has to enunciate, it has to say something, or cry, right, or scream, something like that. That's going to trigger one of its needs to potentially be met by a parent, right? Presumably, it's a parent. Child starts crying or whatever. The mother gets, they feed them, they pick them up, they burp, and then they change them, right? So there is this negativity that's implicit in this arrangement in the child, right? So the child is lacking food, or
it has to express its lack first. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's expressing a demand for a need to be fulfilled, doing that audibly, right? So that's an enunciation.
Word. Well, then he was talking about ideology, basically desire being the underlying engine of ideology, or
they don't really believe in ideology per se
at all, or like it doesn't exist. Only desire exists, right?
Only right.
Like I remember one particularly confusing part of this text was the interviewer asked, "Okay, so then ideology is a Trump loyal?" And then the guy says no, and then yes, because he's like, "No, I wouldn't say, we don't say that, but then it is an illusion," which I mean, that's a Trump loyal. I mean, they're real like kind of flighty guys. It's kind of hard to nail them down.
I think for them, ideology becomes a target because it is a somewhat catch-all, right? Anything that's not in the infrastructure, right? Anything that isn't directly economic, political, then you could kind of say, well, then it's a part of the superstructure. And so it's ideology in the broadest sense. And I think that they want to try to say, well, no, because if desire actually invests the social and is infrastructural as they believe, and they try to work out in a kooky way, right, an anti-Oedipus, then ideology has to be reconfigured, reconceptualized, and not used in this very general way.
Yeah, and like it's more like, it's kind of Foucaultian too, where it's just like ideology becomes subordinate to the power structure. It's like a thing used as an excuse, or it's not a real actual thing with innate value that other things spring from. It's more of a camouflage or something like that.
Yeah, that's a pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a really good take, because they constantly say, the masses weren't tricked to support fascism, that they desired it. That's like one of their main kind of arguments against a sort of using ideology critically anymore, and why they just decide not to, the question of whether it's real or not or whatever. I just think for their conceptual framework, it doesn't have a role anymore.
Word. But at the same time, it's like, I remember that line too kind of struck me too, because it's like, all right, well, yes, everyone sort of participates to some degree in their own kind of oppression in any system, whether it be full-fledged fascism at the highest level that you could define it as, to any other kind of version of state power, right? We kind of have to participate, like help build it, and to some degree have been conditioned then to desire it or whatever, whether subconsciously or whatever. But isn't that still being tricked? No one wants that fascism, actually, right? It's not like we have a deep, are they trying to say we have a deep innate desire to be ruled over by fascism? Like that's the part that I couldn't quite, it's like inescapably part of the human like fabric, or like, and then I guess he's like, we want to resist natural and unnatural, but like, okay, so then where are we? Yeah.
So I think maybe the way to think about it is that, okay, here's the challenge is the unconscious primarily, because you can have your conscious project, I want to liberate, society through, some type of Marxism, communism, etc. But unconsciously, you could still be invested in those fascistic, your libidinal investments on the unconscious, right, at the unconscious level are still directed into these fascistic or dominating, right? Or there's, there's like it could be, what is the despotic signifier, perhaps?
Right. The master signifier, the name of the father, all the phallocentrism stuff that postmodernism is going against. And Kool AD, you made this good point, because
there's this moment where it's not necessarily about any individuals or any groups necessarily being tricked, but where desire itself falls into a trap And that trap they want to say is Oedipus. That's like the overarching kind of argument leading up to how desire falls into the trap of this kind of misrecognition and begins to desire its own repression. And they pretty much say that Oedipus, it's not that psychoanalysis has invented it or even like imposed it directly, but they reinforce the notion with these notions of castration, of lack, of mommy, daddy, all this stuff. And that is, I think, their main target is to try and kind of, if you will, deconstruct or dismantle these kind of reactionary categories that psychoanalysis has kind of relied upon. To piggyback off of what you said, Coop, and then I'll give it back, is the main problem, their main wager on the unconscious is that it is already open to the social. It's already collectively infused. And they kind of want to argue against each one of us as isolated individuals having our own little unconscious, right, as like a little theater with mommy and daddy as like the superego and all of this stuff that psychoanalysis has really banked upon. And they want to try to think of it much more dynamically, whether it be as a machine, as a factory. They use kind of different, these different figures, but.
Yeah, I got you. So yeah, I see that too. They're resisting like a Freudian analysis of the individual and relating to the world via, what you learn as a baby through your family and everything coming from that as some sort of thing that is somehow apart from like literally, 8 billion other people, or, at their time, maybe 6 billion other people, and how that is an organism in and of itself.
Right.
And how, Yeah, I mean, that's cool. That's pretty wavy stuff, actually. I really wish I had gotten to starting reading this earlier. I just been swamped with other stuff. But that's the thing that I kind of find rough about, theory in general, but specifically stuff like, everybody who's boys with Lacan and them, they really love to not get to the point,
Yeah, a lot of foreplay and not a lot of climax, right?
Really, they're edging the whole time, man. I'm like, where's the nut, guys?
Yeah. I mean, like one of the cool things about the book that they're talking about and about the roundtable that we read for the day is the very fact that, it's not necessarily about interpreting the meaning and getting the meaning right. It's really about, when they call their book a flux book, they really think that there are these different lines in the book, these different, you could call them vibes, these different rhythms.
Yeah, I was about to say, it's like their whole shit is like, it's a vibe, guys.
Yeah, it is. I mean, part of it is that, right?
Flows,
it's really about like how it influences us and what can be useful for us, whether it sends us on different paths. I mean, you yourself kind of were saying like, maybe I stare off for 15 minutes and maybe that's just your mind processing and you're being creative without necessarily focusing on any object, or you could be going down these different Wikipedia rabbit holes and looking for background. But all of the, it's really for them. I think one of the people they're trying to talk to isn't just, they're not just talking to analysts, they're not just talking to philosophers, they're not just talking to obviously like schizophrenics and madmen, but they're also talking to poets, right? They're not just talking to Marxists, they're not isolating. They're trying to say like everyone's got a creative streak. And if they can channel it in a certain way and avoid certain pitfalls that traditionally philosophy in general and psychoanalysis in particular falls into, then perhaps desire can be seen as a revolutionary force and not merely reinforcing the status quo, capitalistic subjection, all these other things. So it should vibe with us and inspire us a little bit to get outside the box.
I'm starting to get it a little more as you clarify that, because going back to, just from the introduction of where this text came from, when I was reading the earlier pages where they're talking about kind of like the context of, was it 68 when they, when they wrote Anti-Oedipus? So
they're reacting to May 68, which but it's in 72. So 4 years later.
So it was like
the failed revolution.
The failed revolution. And then, that was another part where I'm kind of like, it felt like almost too victim blamey sometimes. Man, we all as communists fucked it up without kind of, I felt like some more historical moments. Maybe they're against traditional concepts of what history is too. And I guess I can respect that to a degree or whatever, but like, how much of, and this is also a fault of my lack of the history. You can say that any successful communist revolution in history often runs into some problems because the the global schema is still going to be capitalist around you and going to be at war with you, and even like have literal agents within your own state that you're trying to like wean yourself off the state, but you don't know who in that state is actually about that, right? So like you can talk about like, okay, what were our failures? But sometimes it seems like y'all beating yourself up. Like what else was going on here to fucking fuck up 1968? Aside from people's latent animal desires to be domineered again. I think it's like, it also could be the not so latent desires of the domineering people that were still in power in every single country surrounding them, as well as the previous powers that still exist within that country, even if they lost the war. Like there's so many other factors in it. That being said, I still respect that desire should be a more human concept of emotional understanding of what it means to be like revolutionary, what communism actually means and all that stuff, and how to liberate yourself from fascism, what that all means on a less static, strictly socioeconomic, without delving into the human parts of it. I do agree on that side, but then I think that's where I think I need to do some more reading as to like, I know that Deleuze is middle class, his brother died fighting Nazis, and then Guattari's a little more working class, and he was up in the whole communist revolution.
Yeah,
right? He was boys with the communists before, and then like once they kind of started siding with using more state violence and all this shit, he kind of bowed out, I guess. Or what by the end of his life, was he more of an anarchist or just kind of whatever?
He was a Trotskyist as a young kid. He was a bunch of Trotskyist organizations. You know, he was the more militant activist part of the assemblage.
Where he was the spicy boy of the two. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think Guattari's his main problem that he constantly returns to is how militants or militancy can productively make use of analytic tools, psychoanalytic tools. This is why he wants to call it schizoanalysis, to just make a clean break with the traditional methods of theory, right, where you, as an individual, usually middle to upper class, go and you sit in your session, you lie on the couch and you talk about mommy and daddy to the analyst who's supposed to know all the answers, right? With Guattari, he really tried to make it a group, even an institutional type setting where, as we kind of pointed out in the cold open, where it really is about destabilizing the hierarchy of doctor above teaching down to the madmen, where like everyone is participating in these chores, right, by a kind of grid where, you know, you might be injecting someone with drugs one day, you might be doing laundry the next day. And he was constantly trying to think about a frameworks where analysis and communism in practice could enrich one another. And I think that Guattari, I mean, he calls himself a communist throughout his life. At the same time, a book like Anti-Oedipus, you can see it having anarchist moments, having communist moments. It's kind of hard to even pin down to any one strand. But one of the things historically with 68 that Guattari was dissatisfied with was the French Communist Party, who, from his point of view, as a radical militant or whatever you want to call him, from his point of view, the French Communist Party for the longest time had pretty much given up on revolution in his sense of the term and become quite reactionary, to the point where he kind of does blame them for the failure of 68 to crystallize. Not just them, but they didn't help, right? That they kind of conceded too much and, they kind of fucked it up. Right. And that's part of I think the victim blaming that you might have been pointing out earlier.
Yeah. And I just kind of feel like I'm not armed enough with context to be able to pick that apart, but it just seems like that is a weak point, because I do know just in general how those things go is in, say, the USSR and Cuba specifically, and also in, say, Afghanistan for their brief moment of communism, or brief moments of communism outside of the USSR. Other historical moments that I only vaguely know about, it seems like it can't really just boil down to, I mean, there are too many other factors to ever let it be like, the commies dropped the ball on this one.
Right. It's true.
Taylor mentioned a point, and Victor, you were on this too, about Guattari's whole notion of what the subject is. So that's where I think the radicality perhaps is within their idea, is that instead of looking at the subject as this singularity, the unified whole as the subject, right? They're trying to say, no, the subject is not a whole totality. It's all these different machines or these different components of subjectification. So the writing machine, the speaking machine, like all these different machines that constitute the individual, but the individual is kind of an illusion. It's like a cell on a bigger social body. So to extrapolate the human being to almost like a herd animal, or, like a hive of bees, right? So there's different functions within the greater whole, but it's not necessarily this perfect unity in a sort of Hegelian fashion of universal spirit, right? Where there's one universal, or Christ. Christ is the universal at the top that guarantees the whole other system of meaning and like gives every individual their purpose or their divinity or whatever. So this is a more open, because that's closing again. It's through this. It's through the representation. What the representation does. Representation, I mean, something like Oedipus, right? So that is kind of bottling off the individual, and I'm using that in kind of scare quotes. So it's bottling off the desire and clamping off that desire so that it's not circulating. So it's almost like a problem of information flows. So the people at the top of the organization are the last to know what's actually happening, boots on the ground level. You can see that like pragmatically, but also theoretically, right? Because there's so many within hierarchy, right? It's all about everything coming from the top. And so you don't have this more distributed infrastructure for desire and information to flow along to reach. So it's kind of getting bottled in this sort of, I don't know, it's getting crystallized as like a pyramid or something like that is a good way to think of it, perhaps. I don't know if that helps kind of show you like a little bit about, because if the communists are still understanding the subject in this way, if you're understanding the subject to be like this unity, then you're never going to be able to transcend that, right? Because your basic premise of understanding how the social functions is still going to be within this representative structure.
Yeah.
And they're trying to open up that. They're trying to open up the desire to let that flow rather than the codification of flows, of desire, of piss, of shit, of cum, etc.
Word. Yeah, I guess. So, I mean,
That's just a bird's eye view of some of the implications,
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm the big picture guy. He's the smart one.
You painted a vivid picture, as were they too. I mean, you definitely are like pulling from their imagery, which I thought was a little OD when I was reading it too.
Yeah, but it's fun reading though.
It is. I mean, they're insane writers. They do a lot of crazy shit, and they get you on some tangents for surely. I'm not mad at it, but also it's definitely some shit you got to make time for, which ultimately, from a historical materialist perspective, doesn't always make for the easiest integration into an ideology that could be helpful for the working class, I guess. Right, and maybe they're trying to ultimately say these positions of class are more mutable than we give them power to be, in which case I'm like, more power to you for that, I guess. What's weird is that there can be some really like radical anarchistic or like, pure communist, end of state communist kind of readings of this. And then there can also be ways of like, I guess I'm paranoid after, I don't know if it was you that sent me, someone on Twitter.
It was the Foucault, right? The Foucault CIA stuff, right?
Yeah, oh my God. Got me so fucking noided out about this type of writing and thinking, which I know is, like I'd read the article before, but then when the dude started going into detail about his assistant being like, he was never about it. It really got me reading the whole thing, where I'm just like, I can't ever, I mean, I always have, who is this fool? Can I trust them when I'm reading them? Yeah. But like more so now, because it's in these really specific ways, That being said, there's some interesting meat. There's some interesting little fruits and berries and stuff in here. I'm gonna definitely spend some more time with it for sure. I really can't call it yet. I got to read more to really decide if I'm about these guys or not. But
you're gonna keep an open mind, right?
But I do. They make some points. Points were made in this thing, man. I mean, obviously, it's like people seem to like these guys a lot.
You pointed out something really important, which was the fact that I think it's Guattari who's the one who himself kind of admits what we tried to do with Anti-Oedipus was to be able to coordinate these thoughts and these ideas and even mix voices such that when you were asking, I don't know if I trust this guy, there's like the author of the book isn't even just two guys, right? They themselves are like trying to say we scrambled all the codes.
Exactly.
But Guattari himself admits, like, maybe he says we want to do something even more radical, that Anti-Oedipus is still too severe, it's still too tied to like academic speak. It's not like he knows that there needs to be more ways of grounding it in the enunciation of the masses. I think it's kind of how he puts it. Like,
it seems like he was really trying to break out of a specific, I guess because they both have their backgrounds in psychoanalysis, right?
Well, Deleuze knows psychoanalysis, but he's more or less university professor.
Okay, he's a philosophy professor. So like they're both trying to break out of these ways of thinking into something a little more liberating, I guess, or something less tied to the existing structures. Because academia is fully, an apparatus of capital in the state or whatever.
Right.
So like they're trying to bust out of that, and they're doing a lot of backflips in order to do that. Mm-hmm. And I do sense that when I read it, I'm like find it inspiring.
Yeah.
What was a little tidbit that stuck with me that I was reading that's not in this text, but when I started Wikipediaing them, is Deleuze was 2 chapters into writing a very deliberately Marxist communist work.
It's a work called The Greatness of Marx.
Exactly, right? Yeah. When he mysteriously fell out of his own window.
Yeah, that's right.
Why would you commit? They said he committed suicide. Why would you commit suicide when you're 2 chapters into a book you just started? Yeah. Don't add up to me, bro.
The theory is you can either have 2 ways of kind of looking at it. One, he committed suicide because he was in so much pain. He had tuberculosis in the 60s.
He also was living with chronic pain.
And he lost he had
1.5 lungs or something.
Yeah. So you could imagine at the end of his life, the charitable reasoning is that he opened the window for the same reason, just to get some air. You can imagine struggling to breathe, and he opened a window and he either fainted or something like that. That's the more charitable reading. That's the one that I prefer to give, and then that he just committed suicide. As you said, in the middle of writing a very important work, he wasn't in hospice care, shit like that. It wasn't like
this was what year was this? Like the 80s?
Oh, he died in 95.
Oh, 95? It could be, I don't know. I mean, my mind always goes to like he was killed and they covered it. There's like the circumstances, the circumstances lend them. And that's why I think it's the same instinct that makes me think like, well, why are you blaming just the communists when it's just like,
right.
Like Fidel Castro had 350 something attempts on his life in his time. The effects of those aren't necessarily even just to kill him every single time, but just to drive him mad,
that's interesting.
To further just disrupt the idea of, because Marxism at its core is a very easy to grasp liberation theology, ideology, theology, whatever you want to call it.
It has liberation theology aspects. Yeah.
Or really, it's a science, though. It's like an easy to grasp, scientifically provable, objectively. If people were taught Marxism correctly, most people would agree with the principles laid out in that. And so much of intellectual history since the birth of Marxism has been the attempts to destroy it, both physically, the people that try to bring it forth, but also destroy intellectually through texts. And I feel like the denseness of this text seems ultimately a little fishy. I don't know. And maybe that's what they were realizing. They're like, we need to break away from the mire and the muck of this type of writing and thinking. Yeah. And that's why it just really felt like, they finally cleared it out their system. They diarrheaed out all their fluff. Yeah. And now they're ready to go full. All right, let's do this. Let's fucking boot the fucking oligarchy out. And that's my theory. I know it's a kooky little nutcase theory, but end of the day, like, I don't know, man.
I think that what you're maybe missing, the big keystone that you're missing in your analysis, and could be the unconscious. It's unconscious. It's the unconscious investments, because if it was simply about, let me inject the right Marxist theory into your head, that's easy. If I teach you Marxism correctly, you know what I mean? Or like, and that's the thing. who's to decide what's the
what correct Marxism is, and that's like
true.
even a thing that
That's half the battle.
there.
Yeah,
because if you remember, like I said earlier, the one of the big issues is that you can have a consciously revolutionary project, but still have fascistic unconscious investments. And that is what they are that's the
difficult part.
Yeah. Like I said, it's not a matter of, that's kind of a liberal thing, is we just inject you with if we just inject your head with the right ideas, then the material will follow, right? If I free your mind, your ass is going to follow. Well, it's actually, you gotta free your ass first, and then your mind will follow.
Or you got to realize that your ass and your mind are part of the same thing.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, even better. Yeah.
Holistically as like the unit.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, I get that too, but then I don't know if I was exactly trying to say like the answer is just teach Marx correctly.
Right.
Is that even if you try to just teach Marx correctly, there are forces at play globally. The way the world is set up is to block Marx from being taught correctly.
True. That's true. That's at the level of consciousness, though.
That's also at a broader level too, in the intellectual milieu, especially like in America, where Marx is either a straw man or a boogeyman. That's the two worries. But I think that the dialogue you guys are having, I mean, what I was thinking of is, I think you're right. Teaching Marxism definitely helps to make very clear and concrete people's interest, right? Their interest in the system. And the problem is that I think this is why Guattari thinks, in addition to that, we need this discourse on the unconscious. Psychoanalysis tried to be, in its very initial moments, was kind of revolutionary, but very quickly it became subverted itself and sort of became an authoritarian mode of discourse on sick people, on madness, right? And Guattari thinks it compromised way too much. And so if there could be a successful kind of blend or combination of the revolutionary discourse, the revolutionary machine with Marx, and the psychoanalytic machine, I think one of the cogs that they do continuously try to do in anti-Oedipus, it's the art machine, right? They turn to musicians, they turn to poets, they turn to novelists, especially they find in the American novel a lot of these thinkers who are saying things that the philosophers aren't necessarily saying. And they can say them more clearly and more directly, more eloquently. And I think that that's what they realized after they, as you said, after they had vented their shit into 400 pages, Guattari is like, yeah, this book's still too stuffy. We need to be clearer. We can be more concise. We can be more direct.
Yeah. It seems like these are like the post-interview thing where they're talking about their next album's going to be like, no rules.
That's right. I mean, I think that's a perfect way of describing it.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. And I mean, and then it seems like one of them coincidentally died before the next album could drop. It just seems like, I don't know. But anyway, I'm going to get off that point.
No, you're good. I mean, actually, Deleuze and Guattari, they wrote some other stuff together. They had 2 follow-up books, but one of them, because Anti-Oedipus is considered a part of 2 volumes, Capitalism and Schizophrenia. So they did they did drop that second album, and in between, they kind of dropped an EP on Kafka and minor literature. They're thinking about minorities and language and questions of representation and power. And that feeds into the second volume, the second album, which they actually say should be read as though you were listening to a record. You can just kind of open it up into any chapter or any place and play your favorite track, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like, I mean, even if that's not what, like, say, the situation is, for example, we're doing explicitly, that's definitely the effect they had too. Like a lot of stuff like this, even just you naturally end up doing that anyway, because you're like, it's so dense any other way. If you're reading it front to back, sometimes it's like, oh man. There's this one part that they said that did stick with me that I think is important. You have basically these sort of curated conversations where the general public is allowed to kind of participate in maybe some 2 sparring clans around a certain issue on the what, but then the how is left up to the professionals. But they're saying like, well, the how is the what. The nitty gritty of the machinations or the machinations or however you put it are essentially just, they're set up towards whatever the desire of the so-called ideology is. And that any conversation about within that framework is just kind of chitter chatter, essentially meaningless. The thing will roll on.
And then so like what I guess I was missing is how do you propose we bust out? And I guess their thing is we just kind of wiggle around.
Yeah.
And like hopefully figure out as we're wiggling ways to keep ducking up out of it. I feel like I need to, and one of the interviewers was talking about, it's very like, it sucks you in and like, but what's the point? You know, like, I feel like I was siding with him or her. I forget which one. There's a couple, I think, being like, yeah, where are we going with this? And I don't think they fully might've even known per se, or maybe they're being honest. Look, I don't know either. I don't know. It's all fair to say stuff. I'm not mad at this stuff at all. It's very interesting stuff. I'm going to keep reading it, but it is frustrating in that and I guess I'm like, what am I searching for? And it's like some sort of answer like, aha, now I know exactly how to like run up in the soup and change shit.
Here's the steps to revolution. You just got to turn up the heat to 350.
Yeah.
Smoke a blunt, throw on some Kool AD mixtapes. And there we go.
Now you ready, man. Yeah, let's go, man. And then we just, yeah, but I did find there's like on page 13 still, when they're just lying out the background of shit, the people they influenced, I guess, in the 70s. I mean, some of it was cool and some of it was like a little like, all right, y'all Europeans, so you're doing some weird shit. But like,
they have their own problems, their own shit.
Yeah, like the Redskin shit and all their savages and the way they talk about, they have a very, very primitive concept of race, of talking about race and conceiving of it and understanding any sort of academic rigor outside of, the Western academia. It seems like they romanticize it and they want to get there, but I don't think they could spend more time really on that. Aside from that, though, I mean, the fools that fucked with them were like robbing banks, which is cool. They're like, posting up in rich people's houses and like taking them over. That's cool. They're like organizing everybody to, say strike or not pay certain bills that are gouging them or blah, blah, blah. The tactics that came from this theory seem to hold up. But then some of the tactics I guess, and then it kind of gets blurred into, and I guess that's what they're even saying. They're talking about, they're then commenting on how like y'all ran with what we said, and here we are still in this fucking mess. Something about the whole text is just straight confounding stuff,
I think we can maybe help with that too, especially Anti-Oedipus, the book itself. Like, I didn't anticipate the amount of anthropology that goes into it. And it's honestly could be considered maybe more primarily a work of anthropology than anything. And what they do is they use a Spinozist sort of idea of, I guess, like a Spinozist ontology. So they're even conceiving of the earth itself, earth as a machine. And so you have sort of this fractal ontological structure where, it goes down, it goes up to the cosmic. So it can go down to a cell, or within the cells are atoms. You know what I mean? So it's like these little micro, fractals. So the body of the earth is sort of one entity and includes all of us and all the animals and all the physical terrain, etc. So the earth is a machine that allows us to kind of exist. And then we exist on the surface of the earth, on the body of the earth. And then you can extrapolate that up the other way to the cosmic, because the sun allows the earth to exist. Extrapolate that to the universe, right? So they have this very materialist approach, looking at history, looking at anthropology, at how these pre-capitalist societies were, you might even say, characterize it as being like, they're deathly afraid of what is called the flows getting coded. They're actually decoding
of the flow.
Decoding of the flows. And how that
the decoding of the flow.
Decoding.
They say
capitalism is what haunts them, right?
Right. So, capitalism decodes the flows, and how that works what they say is that what happens first is marking of the body. The body is marked. The body is inscribed. It's written upon. The body is a kind of ledger. Right. And so within the tribe, it's to sort of say, so you have you could say like an initiation ritual, right? So a lot of tribes, they would have these, it's kind of like the system of cruelty. So they would choose rocks to do these cuts, these marks on you, but they wouldn't choose the sharpest. If it cuts too smoothly, then there's not
Then
enough
it's
pain, right? They
not
have to.
enough pain, yeah.
They're going to extract a certain amount of pain in this system of cruelty to mark you so that you, and this is kind of showing your indebtedness to the tribe.
But also that you're equal to everyone else. In
That
the
too,
tribe,
yeah, yeah.
Right? That you've gone through the same.
So yeah, it's
We've all gone through the same pain together,
Mm-hmm.
collectively kind of unifies us as a thing with, but yeah, and that how that somehow resists hierarchies eventually. Do they suppose? I mean, there's still some Aboriginal societies that
Yes.
it's small numbers compared to a million years ago, however, a couple 100,000 years or however long. So, I mean, it's possible to have existed through all the mess of modern history,
Right.
without having. So then, shouldn't that be the main? I guess that's what they're saying. Like we should, and I guess they have to a degree. And I guess this was like this, the 60s through the 90s. So it is only more since then has there been more attention paid to that.
Yeah.
And I guess when you think about like liberation movements and like even Zapatistas in Mexico is mostly indigenous. The people in Brazil that were protesting destruction of Amazon rainforest, the DAPL protests, those are all like led by, indigenous cultures that have been set up in such a way that they have resisted the same hierarchical structures of Western society that have enslaved the earth for the most part. So I think if there's glimmer of really radical, I mean, there's more than a glimmer in this work. There's a lot of really radical stuff, but I think maybe the most pertinent radical stuff is the head nod to that. I think even Marx himself said that he was inspired by studying African culture. And I've only seen that referred to. I have still yet to find a specific text. I haven't searched too hard because I got other shit in my life, but I will eventually find that because that one really spread. I was like, yeah, so many people conceive of, and especially like people of color conceive of communism as this white thing that Marx invented, when it's just like, no, this is like actually the first thing. This is the thing from which, like communalism, cooperation. This is how human civilization began, like, I don't know where I'm going with this, but
no. This is good because you brought up the fact that there are still indigenous tribes that can mostly have a sort of autonomy away from the prevailing trend of globalist capitalism. And and one of the points that they make and they draw on anthropologists to help make is the fact that society doesn't evolve naturally towards capitalism. That capitalism is this unnatural, contingent, completely accidental fucking complex and coalescence.
It's like the symbiote.
Forces. Right.
Yeah. It's like the symbiote from fucking what is it? Not
Spider-Man
Carnage.
One. Carnage and Venom in them. Yeah,
Venom.
yeah. Like an alien.
Yeah, Venom.
Right. Symbiote.
It's completely contingent, and it isn't just about enough time. It's not like, well, if Aboriginal or indigenous societies just long enough, they'll have McDonald's. For them, they don't believe in this kind of evolution towards either the state or towards desires, capitalism.
Yeah. Don't lead them towards that.
Yeah.
A good example they use of this too in the book, Anti-Oedipus, is that in China, they actually closed down their silver mines. But something, I forget, it was
they would get just enough and then they wouldn't keep exploiting. They would be like, okay, that's good.
I think it was 13th or 14th century. China had all of the basic infrastructure for a development of capitalism were in place within their social, but it was the electing to close down the silver mines that sort of warded off that evolution or that imposition from the outside of capitalism.
Word.
Interesting to think that it could have happened earlier, that all the forces were there, and yet they didn't, the intersections didn't happen until, at least for the West and in Europe, we can kind of roughly associate it with the transition from feudalism, industrial revolution, all that shit.
It's interesting too that it happens like because they say the transition from like primitive to barbarian happens out of nowhere.
Right. The state, which has always been there, but which comes from outside, it's this very paradoxical notion.
Yeah, it's kind of like, where does the state come from exactly?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that's one that's always, but is it agriculture or is it something after agriculture? I was looking for like, where's the origin, the root, when did things go south? When did shit go wrong?
Did plants domesticate humans? Somebody I follow had that point, and I was like, yeah, that's, I like the question. I don't know if I not
Desire. You ever read that one?
No, I haven't.
Botany of Desire, and I guess, Desire as it relates to this totally makes sense too. Botany of Desire, you should read that one. I forget who wrote it, but it basically, it talks about all that shit of how various plants have their own intelligences and their own preferences and desires, and they impose their desires on the people that grow them, on the societies and each plant has different effects too, and different, like someone's agriculture in a Marxist way determines their culture, agriculture. I totally buy all that shit for sure. That makes sense. It does add up. It's my hypothesis has been agriculture to a degree, which is crazy because so many ultimately when you're anti-state, you're like, okay, so then how do we assure that we can all eat? And then you go to farming. The Zapatistas and even Aboriginals do some farming, It's not all hunt gather. Gathering includes agriculture. It's just there's a type of agriculture. There's a point. The conflict point is somewhere within the complexities of agriculture, I think.
Within almost the mode of production.
Yeah, and maybe surplus and the amount of it and the control around it. I guess.
Yeah, you're right.
Distributing space.
Okay, so here's the thing. So once you do agriculture at scale, I don't know if there's economies of scale that produces the surplus, then it's like, oh shit, how do we keep track of this surplus? Oh, well, we got to come up with a ledger. We got to come up with an inscription system. We got to come up with a recording system. We got to represent the surplus.
And then you distribute space, right? You cut it up into plots,
Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of how private property begins. Their hypothesis is that a certain amount of nomadic distribution of space, a certain amount of nomadism kind of prevents what we're talking about here, right? Which is the concrescence of state power.
Yeah, being mobile enough to like, all right, let's pack it up here if the storm hit or whatever, like that type of situation.
Classers is the one, and they pull on this too. This was in the In Flux thing where it's like, okay, even in the most nomadic, in the smallest nomadic band of hunters, there's still a kind of state form that has to take, because you're taking stock, right?
Yeah.
But that it's also warded off at the same time.
Yeah,
exactly. The chief who has the function of being chief, at least in certain societies, I mean, there's obviously going to be differences, but in the nomadic societies, right, the chief, his power is not to give orders, to coerce. His power is only in mediating strife between two groups. He can only be chief insofar as he can use his speaking powers as a mediation tool. Yeah, he's not the originator of any type of ideology. He's a mediator of instances in which language needs to occur. Yeah. That's it. He's trying to prevent civil
translator.
War. Yeah, he's a translator. That's right. He's a translator.
Ooh, that's good. I like
a broker, an arbitrator, somewhat. Yeah. But he's trying to prevent civil war. He's trying to prevent the tribe from, at worst, killing itself off, but also splintering and leaving off, which has its own implications for living together, right?
So. And I think was partially what I was trying to think of before was the idea of a leader position. You look at a tribe and you assume that the main mediator when conflict pops up is the chief. When it's like, no, that's just one of the jobs of the tribe. A shaman has many. If you come at the moment where you're seeing the ritual occur, the shaman might fool you into thinking he's the leader.
Right?
Because
that's right.
Right. It's at any given moment occurring according to the context.
The problem to solve.
Emerges. Yeah. A function, a position is there to solve a problem, not just to be the solver of all problems. It's like each problem has a position. And what happens under capitalism is they get compartmentalized into like, okay, you're in charge of this, you're in charge of that, and I'm in charge of all of y'all. Right. Meaning like I actually have the power. You become now a tool of me, the leader. And so you solve problems according to my desires. What point in, human psychology? And I don't know. I mean, we got to be honest here. Like so much of the dirty stuff in human history has been perpetrated by Europe specifically. Yep. And my little theory, I'm going to go off on the little nutcase theory again. I really think the plague might have something to do with it. What is it?
You're right.
2/3 of the population died. That's a traumatic experience right there. And then to be fair, imperialistic violence had been happening before that. Colonial violence had been happening before that. Right. But I feel like it did not ratchet up.
For sure. Oh, yeah. It hyper accelerated.
You're right. Yeah, I guess what it is these like, the human being he still comes from an animal, is an animal ultimately. Yeah. And we have, violent urges and this and that bad urge. Certain instances will magnify
Trigger,
and mutate and turn it into the current disease we have. We're in a pandemic still because of mismanagement. Maybe we can heal. That's one of the ones that I'm like reading stuff. I'm like, is it ultimately trying to like help me with some tidbits or help us with some tidbits as to like, how do we heal? How do we get out of this? I mean, these guys don't pretend to have the answers, which is, I respect them for that. Yeah. I guess the frustration you feel is just the frustration you would feel just up against the world, thinking about how fucked the world is anyway. Like,
right.
I mean, that's why it is. It's not quite different from, poetry and music and all that stuff. And even like the idea that the arts and the sciences and the humanities all are separate things, the roles that they pop up, but they're all connected to
they're all integrated into the body without organs.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I think that's all of that's good. And one of the things, I mean, you say you respect them for not claiming to have all the answers. And I think that's obviously good, because if they did claim that, they'd be lying. And
exactly. Yeah.
And the other thing that I respect is the fact that they are not going to sugarcoat, but they're also not going to merely kind of take a nihilist turn and say nothing matters. None of our actions matter. Because I do think that the last thing I would say is, to try to think about these things and not scream into the void does take some energy. It does take some, it does take a little bit of courage, right? Because it's so much easier to not think. Right. To not force oneself to think, even if it may be maddening and we may be like doing psychical damage to ourselves at the same time. We have that, you call it curiosity. You could call that desire to know, desire to question, desire to formulate problems in ways that we think perhaps could be configured in a certain way that, at least on a small scale at first, could be solvable. Right. Because politics starts at home. You know what I mean? Like politics. So I respect that for them too, that they keep enough optimism, because they're not, as I said, they're not just like, oh, everything's fine, because then they wouldn't have written a book. But they do think that there is an optimism in the struggle, in resisting, specifically within ourselves. One of my takeaways from the book is that it helps me to find new ways of thinking about my own tendencies for power and authority, and my own kind of impositions of my will onto others. And so it kind of forces me to think of myself a little. I mean, it's like, I'll stop with this. It's like I think it's in the New Testament where Jesus, it's either like a line or whatever, but it's take the plank out of your own eye before you criticize the speck in your brother's eye, kind of thing. I do feel like there's an element of that where it's not just about making it all about myself, but it is about being more aware that we do have fascist tendencies inside us, and they can creep up on us when we're not paying attention.
Yeah, it happens through participation. If we want to rid the world of fascism, we need to like learn how to rid our bodies of it in the same way, like Lorenzo Combo Irving, the kill the cop in your head, that whole vibe. I mean, end of the day, I fuck with these guys. And even if they are dense, I don't think that dense necessarily has to be, counter-revolutionary, as some might, put it. Make some time to face the void. Even if it slows down your work, more power to that, slow down the work, put that aside and think about this for a minute. Because like, how else are we going to get out of this? If we're, say you want to do a general strike, what y'all doing on that general strike? You might as well read some theory, once you get the mutual aid, get your mutual aid figured out. But then, you're probably going to be reading theory on that, just to kind of be like, what we do next,
And it is interesting that Marx is both, I mean, he's a co-author of the Communist Manifesto, which is kind of meant, it had immediate effects, and it was, I'm not gonna say diluted, but it was clear and direct. But he also wrote fucking volumes of Capital, right?
Yeah.
So he kind of shows the extremes of the direct and then the more elaborate.
But he always kept it on topic. I feel like
that's true. That's true.
You're like by the end of the
day, schizophrenic kind of like Marx
had an idea where he was going next. This stuff is like, woo, I'm in the soup right now.
What if Marx was a schizophrenic, and then you get anti?
There you go, right?
And you have to take that into account, because it's like, you're going to have like a revolution, and you're going to be handing out rifles to everybody at the factory to rise up. What's everybody's mind like? Can we all just get a mental health check right quick? Like, that's real. That's super real.
Coop, do you have any last thoughts? I know we
yeah,
said
we're a little
gonna-
bit over an hour. So I do want to read this last little passage because I do think it does kind of get to some of Victor's concerns here. I think the positive element too is like they say the revolution is possible. It's not a fantasy. Under certain conditions, the masses do express their revolutionary will. Their desires sweep aside all obstacles, open unheard of horizons. But the last to notice it are the organizations and men who are supposed to represent them.
Word. Yeah. All right, cool. That's like literally the one sentence I was looking for. I was like, when's this sentence going to show up in this paper, bro?
Yeah.
And I must have like, I took a nap before y'all called. So I must have like gave up right before I found that.
That's all good. I support naps, honestly. I do.
Hey, man, you need those, man. That's part of the thing. I really enjoy having been forced to do this reading with y'all. I don't think I would have made the time for, I don't know, like when I would have. Glad y'all had me.
I feel that because, if I didn't have to read this shit for the podcast, I would just be like, I wouldn't do it. Right. That's the good thing about the podcast is it forces me to read. I've got an episode I got to record. So I read that shit,
Yeah. No, this is good stuff.
We wanted to get a little dose, give you a little dose, and because it really is about what you can make use of it. And if it doesn't work for you or for what you're doing, they say move on to something else, right? They're pretty legit like that, where it's a part of the same thing. Say they don't have all the answers, but they're not going to say that their book is for everyone, because really it is, as you said, it's an individual encounter, but they're trying also to say that there are collective concerns involved. So
I think an underlying thing is like a trust that these ideas occur regardless of them saying it or not. And I think it comes back to also a surplus thing too, where it's just so much of collecting surplus is a fear of, the storm or the tiger or the locust,
the contingency,
and not trust that the earth is abundant and will provide if you let it be and if you don't fuck with it too much, And I feel like they embody that spirit, and they really, they really were creating a vibe, and it becomes something that is poetic and it does kind of foray into literature and the, it's like lyrical. And I think it's important. It's like they're really trying to step the entire thing into a new kind of.
Well, I don't know. It's not exactly a political economy, but it's kind of this.
It's a libidinal economy.
Libidinal. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Elemental. Okay.
Yeah, it's an elemental one too, because it is materialist and it breaks down. It breaks down the genre barriers, right? And even disciplinary barriers, and
you can still tie it back into like, all right, so how are we gonna get the general strike roll? And like it does. All the avenues lead to, all right, well, this thing right here is obviously very oppressive. Through its obscurity, it still points to it clearly somehow. Good stuff is all I'm trying to say.
We really appreciate having you on and you spending the time, not only
for
reading,
sure,
but spending the time talking to us. And an hour went by really quickly because I was enjoying myself, and I feel like
same.
Same here.
And so Coop, I'm gonna give you the sign off.
What resonated when I was reading this text is, it is a vibe. When on tour, we were actually lighting people up and people were vibing with us, whether on stage or off. It was when we were letting go of the concept of structure and just wherever, like,
hell yeah,
you just end up at some random house with like 20 people you've never met before and actually connecting in a real way and all that. Like it doesn't always, sometimes you're like, and I feel like we did a lot of drugs too. So sometimes you're like, sometimes it lowers your vibration to the point where you don't actually get to the sweet spot of actually connecting with people. It's a dice roll with that. You got to like mediate that. But
it can facilitate or block. When we have you back on, we can just kind of shoot the shit and talk about your artistry. I mean, Coop was showing me all your videos.
Yeah, I had to give him
all the music. Yeah, the rundown.
I had to give him the quick notes on your career. So
maybe next time we can talk more about your artistry.
Oh yeah, it is. I mean, I'm actually, it kind of does it's a lot like if you're just trying to step into it for the first, I imagine it is kind of Lacanian in a sense, or it's kind of like dense there's a whole language to it, and it's it's a whole deep old.
You called it something, right? You called it like panic rap, or what was it? What was?
Oh no, that was actually.
He said panic attack rap.
That was Hema. That was Hema.
Oh yeah, you're right.
But like he was coming in after my verse, so I feel like that was sort of his take on my verse before that, I guess. I don't know.
Do you have a self-description? Do you have a description of like your style?
I don't really have one, I guess.
Okay.
Free form beat, based, I guess some people say.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just kind of like,
And you riff and pun and
riffing and it's just riffing, jazz, based free association, just vibing, just like kind of like I always dug the act of being in the studio and listening to the song, the beat, the music, and then just like writing
roll with it,
going writing around, And I always kind of like, I like stuff. I'll do stuff that's more structured. This is a song about this. But it always usually was kind of like an assignment. Someone's like, hey, like this or that, the label, the distributor guy, the manager really wants you to do one that makes a little more sense. Or, it was always, or, someone like you're working with someone, can you do something that kind of has more comes to, but I always felt like I was always kind of like bowing. My natural inclination is to make like a sort of music you could wander through, kind of like Hedge music, But I have nothing against the song that's because all those songs exist within like artist catalogs that are in their own right a hedge maze, like you can tell a specific traditional old story. That shit is timeless. That stuff's never going away either. It's everything. I like everything.
yeah. I mean, it's a good vibe. That's
shit. Obviously don't like fascism, capitalism, all that stuff. But I like, generally.
It's good to know your enemy though, right?
Exactly.
That's one of those things.
Yeah, because I mean that ultimately is against liking everything. That's all I'm trying to say.
Are you going to do any touring? You just released a new mixtape too, right?
Touring or like no like formal tours.
Nothing like countrywide or whatever.
I haven't been super proactive on planning on that stuff yet because I feel like I got many other loose ends currently to tie up. But yeah, I'm a tour again eventually. I'm definitely doing shows here and there. I got some homies that they're kind of like a jazz act, but they'll do some rap too. So they get some rappers on, and I drop in on their sets around San Francisco. So but yeah.
And you dropped what, like 35 mixtapes this year already, or what?
Yeah, something like 20 something. I don't know. But and I got some more in the holster, but yeah.
Siren production right there.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there you go. Let that shit flow.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. We'll let you go.
But yeah, man, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on.
Loved having you, my friend.
Cool.
We're about to grab some food too, so this will be the Machinic Unconscious Happy Hour with Cooper Cherry and Taylor Atkins signing off. Peace.
The very roots of evil, of negativity and singularity, including the ultimate form of singularity, which is unconscious. To the whole state of things, the pure violence without object anymore. This is the typical violence of information. It's violent because what happens there is a murder of the real, the vanishing point of reality.
Let's not have a misunderstanding here. What I meant is the following.
With nothing left but recycled, whitewashed, lobotomized people, as in Clockwork Orange.